Tire pressure? Did you say on the tire? Ooh, sorry. Think again. The best place to find the recommended tire pressure is on a sticker, usually located inside the driver's door, or check the owner's manual. Driving on underinflated tires can cause excess heat buildup, and that can cause tire damage and even tire failure. Make sure you check your tire pressure at least once a month and before long trips. It will save you money at the gas pump and keep you safe. A message from the Rubber Manufacturers Association.
Talk 1470 is WWNN Pompano Beach and 95.3 FM W237BD Boca Raton. The Health and Wealth Radio Network. 1470 AM and 95.3 FM. The Health and Wealth Radio Network.
Caregiver Solutions Info with Marcia Teal. Tuesdays at 5 p.m.
Talk 1470 AM and 95.3 FM WNN. Now you can get Talk 1470 WNN on 95.3 FM too. Loud and clear. Health and Wealth Radio, WNN.
The opinions expressed on the following sponsored program are strictly those of the host, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors.
It's Monday night at 9. Time for Sex Talk with Dr. Richard Siegel, a certified sex therapist and sexuality educator. Dr. Siegel is here to answer all your questions about sex and sexuality that you might not have known who to ask. He'll also welcome special guests to talk about a wide variety of topics within the fascinating world of sexuality. So, welcome to Sex Talk.
Good evening and welcome to Sex Talk. I'm Ricky Siegel, as always with my brother Larry Siegel, clinical sexologists and sex therapists and sexuality educators. We have this wonderful job descriptions. We get to talk about sex.
Yeah,
and
could be worse.
This is Sex Talk. Call in if you'd like. Our number here is 888-565-1470. And if you're local listening on the radio, we're at 1470 AM and 95.3 FM. Or we should be streaming live on Facebook. Look for Sex Talk with Dr. Richard Siegel. We'd love to hear what you're thinking. Mm-hmm. Our topic for today is one that... believe it or not, even a lot of sexuality educators and sex therapists often forget to emphasize more, and that is, oddly enough, sexual pleasuring.
Yeah,
and pleasure enhancement.
You've often said things like, as sexy as sex can be, learning about it, talking about it is decidedly unsexy. Yeah. And there is such an obvious omission, especially when you talk about what's in schools. Very few sex education programs talk about pleasure.
Sex ed is pleasure phobic. Of course, we know that, and we talk about it on the show a lot. Sex ed is about consequences. And generally, especially in this country with young people, sex ed is scaring the crap out of people to avoid having sex, to not get diseases or get pregnant or destroy their life, because sex is like a vice, like drugs and crime and gangs that they have to say no to. So
we don't want to tell them that it can feel good because they may want to do it.
And you know, oh, I touched this and it, oh, no, don't do that. You'll go blind, right? So, we have a pleasure phobic, even sexual health and sex ed, so that young people aren't taught about sexual pleasure or deriving pleasure from their bodies.
Yeah, in fact, we had what potentially was one of our greatest Surgeon Generals. Remember, under, ironically, President Clinton.
Indeed.
Who,
the great Joycelyn Elders.
Yeah. And why was she fired?
A hero, an absolute hero. Not only was she the first African-American woman to hold the position of Surgeon General in the history of the country, and a fierce advocate for comprehensive sexuality education, and after a brilliant career in medicine, was fired for answering a question from the press about whether or not she thought masturbation should be included in sex ed curricula.
For high school students.
Right. Nobody in their right mind was thinking lecture demonstration. Okay, boys and girls, today I'm going to show you how.
Right, now spread them.
What it is. Some people do, some people don't. Nothing bad happens to you. Basically like any sane sex ed curriculum. Yeah, and for that, the outrage, the pressure on the president, on Clinton, from, remember, he had a Republican Congress.
Yeah.
He was pretty much as stymied as Obama was. It was Newt Gingrich's Congress, wasn't it?
Yes.
He was forced to fire her for that outrageous suggestion that, especially, I mean, I remember even years before, Ann Landers, doesn't get any more middle of the road than that, recommended that high school students be taught about self-pleasuring as an alternative to intercourse to avoid the consequences of unintended pregnancy and disease. How is this a scandalous thought? What is so outrageous about Ann Landers?
Well, I mean, it's not about Ann Landers. It's about what she was saying. I mean, again, even the word, and how many times have we talked about it? I can't stand the word masturbation. It is such an ugly word.
It's a back-tightening word.
It really is. It really
Although
is.
more for older people, I've found. Remember, this is an old topic as well, and I've noticed a difference with millennials, that baby boomers and a lot of Gen Xers, it was kind of softer to talk about self-pleasuring instead of masturbation, not just because it's such a loaded word. And what's the classic definition, right? To disturb
with the hands.
Or defile some horrendous shame and guilt legacy.
Right. And by the way, if you're doing that and you are disturbing yourself, you should really talk to somebody.
You're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even that expression, that very violent sounding expression, doesn't sound like one is being kind to oneself.
Yes, absolutely.
So, yeah, if we can't talk about pleasure, and we can't teach that young people can expect that their sexuality is a source of joy and pleasure in their lives, then all we're doing is the same old gloom and doom and scare tactics, and which just triggers adolescence BS detector anyway and shuts off any and all messages.
And I think it's an important point to make that you just started to open up there. There's a reason why we, as a country, lead the world in just about everything that can go wrong when it comes to sex and sexuality, whether we're talking about unintended pregnancy rates, STI rates, including HIV and per capita rates, sexual crime, sexual violence and victimization, harassment. All of this really stems from this sort of puritanical, pleasure-phobic way of looking at sex.
Right.
And the fact that we kind of squeeze all the pleasure out of it, which just sort of drives it underground. And people are going to find their way, but it's not going to be with good help, with good information, with good assistance, because we're not upfront. We're not just even open about the fact that this feels good.
Right. Not only a lack of information, but a lack of comfort. So it gets shrouded in shame and guilt. And all of this association that this is this horrible thing that only losers who can't find a partner are supposed to resort to. And just, we talk about the flaws of sex survey data, that way of doing research. Like I always tell my students, imagine just standing outside the mall asking people as they walk by with a clipboard, I'm doing sex survey research. Just one question, do you masturbate? And check yes or no. And you add up all your checks at the end of the day, and you find that 98% of people do not masturbate. Because what a weird way to ask a question. You go up to some weirdo comes up to you after the mall. So there's ways of gathering this kind of research, and of course, it goes all the way back to Kinsey, the first genius at developing ways to interview people and get sexual histories and derive statistics about what people do. And the truth is that the vast majority of people do engage in some form of solo sex. We could probably say almost all people, certainly in the modern times, have had their first orgasm by themselves.
Yeah.
Right? So this idea of discovery, maybe in generations past, women discovered their sexuality after they got married and started having children.
Well, because again, days gone past, that happened as soon as they became
mature,
reproductively mature and sexually blossoming.
Right. Yeah.
So there really wasn't the kind of issue that we used to see. And we know, again, statistically, you talk about virtually everybody. Statistically, 98% of men do engage in some kind of self-pleasuring. And we know that statistically 2% of men lie.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's the old classic. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, it's hard to have. We can't have a discussion about pleasure, sexual pleasure, that doesn't begin with the self.
Right.
And to think that all of this religious and conservative messaging that says that pleasure can only be acceptable or sanctified if it's in the context of a married relationship, preferably for the sake of procreating.
Right.
Right. That
Right.
the pleasure is a side effect, but any kind of sexual activity that's sought for the sole purpose of feeling pleasure is judged as somehow inappropriate and sinful.
In most. Again, we know that there is a very huge exception with Orthodox Judaism. Right? There is one of the canons in Orthodox Judaism where there is a mandate. It is by law that a husband has to sexually satisfy his wife.
Right.
And you want to talk about the standard that they use?
There's a schedule, based on occupation.
Right.
That depending on how often a man is home, right, if he's a traveling salesman once every 6 months or whatever, traveling salesman in biblical
3
times.
months, shepherd.
Right? But if a man was a farmer or owned his own business every day, had to satisfy his wife every day.
Yep.
That was kind of...
So, I mean, with a lot of the, the criticisms and a lot of the things that any type of religious orthodoxy brings, this is an interesting light that shines out of all of that.
Yeah, but we still have much more of a legacy of, Old Testament stories of Onan and spilling of seed and this idea of self-pollution and wasting syndromes. I mean, the lunatic doctors Kellogg and Graham, inventors of the cornflake and graham cracker, were, a lot of people aren't aware, these were kind of sex phobic nut jobs that thought young boys had to eat a bland diet to keep the flames of their libido down and keep them from engaging in the sins of self-pollution. There'd be these kind of cages with metal spikes over.
I didn't want to have to think of those, like little iron maidens.
Right. So, or boys would have their wrists tied to the bedposts to keep them from touching themselves. And there's still, I don't know if it's a goof or not, but there's a website, I see it all the time on social media, where they call it like it looks like a crucifix, like a mattress, a thing for boys to sleep on where they can't touch themselves. Frightening.
That's great. So let me ask you this again, since I want to jump into this topic. Sex is kind of innately pleasurable. Right. A lot of these things that no matter how we feel about what we do, they feel good. They give us pleasure. So why do we have this focus? Why is there such energy put into pleasure enhancement? It's almost to the point where it seems like the undercurrent is we're not getting enough pleasure.
That's the crazy thing, yeah. And I think most sex therapists will tell you this, that there's a lot of people having a lot of sex that is not pleasurable because they're working too hard. It's kind of an off-the-cuff, goofy joke to say that it's only sex work if you're getting paid for it. But it is supposed to be sex play. And even sex workers are entitled to enjoy and derive pleasure from the sex that they're having, right? But so especially guys, we talk about this a lot too. Guys are usually so filled with anxiety about performance pressure.
Sure.
And are they big enough and hard enough? Are they lasting long enough and not too soon? And don't take too long. That it's work and they're not enjoying themselves. So pleasure enhancement, I want to get into this too. This kind of insanity, right? If you were to do a Google image search for pleasure enhancement, and you're not going to find lovemaking tips. You're not going to find things about sexual communication. You'll find thousands and thousands of things that look like this, right? This just incredible array of, remember, completely unregulated, not drugs, but supplements, and just for men, for women. I was surprised how many of these are. It seems as many are for women as for men.
Sure.
They
all just didn't
have
get
the
as much
familiar
airtime.
names. Like Bill Maher said years ago, the pharmaceutical companies decided that if they really wanted a drug to sound powerful, they'd put a V or a Z or an X in the name. These have sometimes all three.
All three, absolutely.
Viaxis, Viamax, Manforce Extends, Viramax, Climaxa, Big Jim and the Twins, Staying Power, Xenofem, right? It's just this endless parade of BS crap, right? There's really nothing. Well, I want to
But
ask you, I know
it's BS
you know
crap.
more about some of this supposedly anecdotal, pharmacognosy, kind of like the naturally occurring things that supposedly have reputations.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reputations, but there's very little fact. There's very
And
little
certainly
real.
Extends or Enzyte Bob or those kind of products that people throw their money away on don't have any.
Right. And I think it's also important to point out that one of the reasons why there are so many of these, this is such a multi-million-dollar industry, aside from the fact that a lot of them are based on the scam of automatic billing and shipping.
Yeah.
And they kind of have this thing, it's like, money back guarantee where or risk free, which it really is. You may qualify for that if you've paid up front for a year, and then you're not going to get anything back. That's where most of their lawsuits are. But I think the important thing to know, to keep in mind is that all of these products that are out there, and I will say none of them work. None of them are any good.
Well, there's certainly no such thing as any drug that's going to grow a penis.
Right.
And
Right.
I mean, I think part of the reason why they make so much money or don't get too many requests for money back is who wants to be the guy to say,
It's an
my
embarrassment.
penis is so small that even your miracle product didn't
Right.
help me. I want my
But
money
they've
back.
they've also prepaid for a year and are trying to get it back that way. But I think the key is that all of these products that are out there, that does not speak to the fact that they're any good. That speaks to the fact that all of these companies are exploiting that insecurity that people have. They're exploiting what you just said before, that people are working so hard and lacking so much in the pleasure department.
And
So they're taking advantage of that.
And because it's so focused on mechanical genital acts and functioning, people tend to assume that enhancement means that I need some product or drug or chemical to do it for me.
Right. I have to get something
How
extra.
long have guys been using numbing agents as a treatment for rapid ejaculation? If that's not the craziest example of what we're talking about, that a guy would rather have sex with a numb penis than risk being embarrassed or not look like a super stud. How is there any pleasure if you're numb?
And it's already an unrealistic expectation. That how long they're supposed to be lasting.
Right.
All right. So we know all of this stuff really doesn't do much good. All of these natural male enhancements, which is one of those meaningless phrases.
It's a brilliant marketing phrase.
Brilliant marketing, absolutely.
Yeah, it means absolutely nothing.
But you're right. There's nothing that's going to make any part of your body bigger. It'll make your wallet much smaller, but that's about it. So none of these things really work. So what can people use? Right now, there are products and things like that, but should people first go to a product for their enhancement? Where should people start?
Well, putting aside this whole kind of nutraceutical supplement and remember, anytime you see that little box on a commercial that says these claims have not been evaluated by the FDA, ... means it's nothing.
Right.
Of course, the next most common thing I think most people think of in terms of pleasure enhancement is sex toys.
Right.
Right? So those kinds of products that are designed to directly stimulate the genitals.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I pulled up also this reference to Alabama state law, which strictly prohibits,
Yes.
it is unlawful to produce, distribute, or otherwise sell sexual devices that are marketed primarily for the stimulation of human, I don't know why they had to put that in there.
Yeah, it's an interesting qualifier.
Human genital
although it's
organs.
Alabama.
Alabama claimed these products were obscene and that there was, quote, no fundamental right to purchase a product to use in pursuit of having an orgasm.
Mm-hmm.
This is still on the books.
This is actually
challenged-
freshly on the books.
It was challenged by the ACLU, overturned, reinstated by a federal judge,
Yeah.
appealed to the Supreme Court, who ignored it, and last action was 2009 to this day. Even since the Lawrence v. Texas, that kind of privacy statute that supposedly overrode all of these crusty, dusty old
all those
anti-sodomy
sodomy
laws,
laws, yeah.
right, that said what people do in private is paramount. Sex toys are considered a greater threat to public safety than guns and ammo.
Yeah,
And I
absolutely.
would
Isn't
bet
that
in
interesting?
Alabama especially, you could probably go into the Walmart and get guns and ammo pretty darn easily. But sex toys are a dangerous and threatening thing that are illegal.
Yeah.
A couple of southern states have these silly laws where products have to be sold as personal massage devices. And
Right,
they
and
can't
that's-
look like
goes
a
way back.
penis.
Yeah.
If it looks like a penis, it's not allowed to vibrate, and it has to be sold as a condom demonstration tool.
Right.
Like sexuality educators just popping up all over the Deep South. It's absurd.
So, again, there's all of that stuff. And I also like what you said, that for a lot of people, especially professionals, that first thought when we think of enhancement is a product, a toy, something outside of themselves. But as sex therapists, our first, I guess, focus, the first line we would look at for pleasure enhancement would be internal.
Sexual activity that's stimulating for both people involved.
Sure.
Or-
But things like being present,
Right.
right? How many guys and women as well, again, we talk about that performance anxiety. We talk about that spectatoring where people will step out of
people are in
themselves
their
and
heads.
start watching themselves and judging.
Right.
And that's the thing. So for me, the first line we would want to look at is how do we help people get out of their head and into their body? Because that has to be the first thing when it comes to enhancing pleasure.
What would be a better pleasure enhancer than a partner's pleasure? Right? And so, I mean, guys miss this too, I think, more often, that they're so intent on their performance that they're not even noticing
Right.
that their partner's pleasure. And of course, to tie them together, I think part of the reason why toys are a common thought to enhance pleasure and a threat to guys, because they're often necessary because of that same lack of sex ed that most guys and many women have no idea that intercourse just doesn't do it.
Right.
That's just not the best way for a woman to achieve an orgasm.
I mean, it's such a small part of sex play.
Right.
Some guys smaller than others, but it's generally just a really small part of the overall template that we want to look at.
So you're right. The pleasure enhancement starts with knowing our bodies. I guess it's a sad reality, but we understand why most guys are so clueless about women's anatomy. But we're just dumbfounded at how many women have no idea about their clitoris, about the entire anatomy of it, not just the little man in the boat.
It's astounding.
And that its role in sexual pleasure and orgasm. That just moving something back and forth in a vagina, it's kind of a sleeve, anatomically speaking.
And even when they're by themselves, another thing that's always kind of just sort of blown my mind a little bit are, and again, it's got to a point where if a woman comes in and says, I don't have orgasms, my first question always was, do you read Cosmo? Is Cosmo
the pressure,
really
the standard
thing
too
here?
high?
Right?
Yeah.
Well, but it really, I think, set a lot of women up. Right? Now, Cosmo, when it first came out in the early 60s, was really incredible. One of the best things I think ever happened to female sexuality. First time women were given permission to explore their own pleasure, to kind of be in it for themselves, to feel good, to experience their own orgasm, and that their primary goal should be their own pleasure. But then it quickly went the other way.
Like if you're not multiply
it
orgasmic,
started telling
swinging
women
from
what
the
kind of
chandeliers.
orgasms they're supposed to be having.
Right.
Neighbors pounding on the walls, peeling off the ceiling in multiples. And what had happened, I think, and where I see this even still today, that women do, even a lot of millennials, come in with this expectation. It's like they're waiting for the thunderclap. They're waiting for that big thing, yet their own orgasmic style.
They're missing the waves.
It's just it's not terribly intense. It's just pulses of pleasure. But if they're waiting for this, they miss this.
Yeah, I often ask this of women therapists. I don't know if it's sexist. If we're dudes, obviously we can only relate so far. But I'm very curious when I hear women say, when their answer to the question, have you ever had an orgasm, is, I'm not sure. And most women say, no, she didn't. Right? But sometimes
I think there is that in-between place.
Yeah.
Again, talk about being out of your body.
there was at least 3 completely different cultural backgrounds from which I heard references to Bob, right? The battery-operated boyfriend.
Right.
When we were in Jamaica, of course, from an old Hungarian woman that I had the pleasure of working with many years ago, and from a white American woman. So it's obviously fairly universal that Bob is kind of seen as a substitute, a surrogate. In fact, that little adorable Hungarian woman was really protecting her husband. It was a chance of kind of doing sex therapy for one because he was way too embarrassed to come in, but was absolutely assuring me that he was home, enthusiastic and eager, waiting for her to come home with the instructions.
Okay.
But she came in proud. She found on Google, she was like, I'm anorgasmic, like she had made this discovery. And of course, wasn't at all. She was covering for her husband. They'd been together since they were 15, but they were 69 years old. And he was this kind of very common thing with guys kind of rushing to the finish line. If they feel their erection starting to lag, they want to lunge to try and finish before they lose their erection. And if he could not, if she wasn't able to climax before that point, then she would bring in Bob. So the husband felt humiliated, emasculated, like the relief pitcher who was pulled out because he couldn't finish the game. And, Bob had to come in and finish for him. The simplest suggestion of bringing Bob in at the beginning that she can, enjoy the vibration while her husband, while they were engaging in intercourse. That was it.
Okay. Now, again, I would be inclined to take a step back, even before Bob. And first thing that I would probably recommend is stop thinking about orgasm.
Right.
Stop making this a goal-oriented, goal-directed type of activity. Take away that imperative.
Of course, which all sex therapy starts with.
Right. And allow people to just sort of experience touch, just feel. You don't have to do anything. Feel. It's one of the hardest things for people to do when they're being sexual is just experience being pleasured. Always have to do something. Let me grab this. Let me rub that while you're doing this
Still
to me.
playing TV repairman, right?
Right. Just
working all the knobs.
Just to experience nothing, laying there, sitting there, however it is, and just feel.
An immersive thing.
Yeah.
Being in that ecstasy, that sexual place, right? Pleasure
Absolutely.
It's not really, it's a process. It could be a figurative place. But yeah, absolutely.
And pleasure is the goal. Orgasm is a side effect.
Excellent. Well put.
That's kind of the way I like to look at it. Pleasure is the goal.
God, I hate how fast this half hour flies by. We're going to need a longer show. We need sponsors so we can afford a longer show.
With the last minute or so.
Yeah.
Okay, we want to make sure that people get out of their head and connect to their body. And that also means, guys, don't be thinking of baseball. Don't be thinking of Donald Trump's hair. All these things that people want to do to try to distract themselves. In fact, a pleasure enhancer and a good distractor is to think of specific things that you like and turn you on about your partner.
Right. And even safer sex should not be seen as a pleasure detractor, but eroticizing safer sex, having fun with condoms and lube. And no guy's going to claim he's losing the moment if his partner's putting a condom on.
That's such a big thing, too. Well, it's not fun.
We're going to need a part 2.
Do that. Yes,
right?
definitely.
Next Monday, we'll continue this. We'll continue to discuss sexual pleasure. What better thing to talk about on Sex Talk? Thank you for joining us. Yes. Please join us next week. Like us on Facebook. Share the show. We need to get our numbers up so we can continue bringing this to you.
Absolutely.
Hopefully we'll see you next week.
Good night.
Thanks.
And good sex.
You've been listening to Sex Talk with Dr. Richard Siegel. Join us every Monday night at 9 on WNN, 1470 AM and 95.3 FM. Or watch live streaming video at AMP2 TV Productions on Facebook, or look for the shows on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you'll join us again next week.
The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored